Hi, I'm Everett Moore, author of Growing Up Country, Rural Life in the 1950s and 60s. Today I'm standing in front of the home that I grew up in. I was actually born in this house, as was my older two brothers. My younger sister was the only one actually born in a hospital. This was a 3-bedroom home, no heat upstairs. We had a oil space heater in each room downstairs, and it was a very comfortable home to grow up in. This was a typical type farmhouse of the day. The road now in front of the house is paved, but at that time it was a dirt road and was not paved until after my elementary years. This was a home that Mom and Dad bought when they were 18 years old, and at that point they couldn't even title the property in their names because you needed to be 21 to be considered an adult. So the farm was actually placed in my grandfather's name first until they became legal age and then took title to the property. And it's the same home my mother died in after residing here for 69 years and dying on Mom and Dad's anniversary. It was a great home. We had a lot of room to play and roam. And right now the property and many of the surrounding properties are larger fields dotted with houses. Back in the day, though, it was not the large fields, and most of the farmland was small fields with hedgerows between the fields. Often those hedgerows had grown up over some fences that were used to impound cattle or the horses for farmers of previous generations. A large farm at the time was considered 100 acres. They were not the mega farms that we see today. As a child, we did not spend a lot of time indoors. As soon as we got home from school, it was outside to play until dark, and there was plenty of room to roam. And in fact, much of my summertime was spent roaming outside, walking across the field to the neighbors, or walking in the woods, wading in the big ditch that surrounds our property, or just playing ball with some of the neighbors. Okay, we're in front of the barn now, and the barn meant so many things. Number one, when I was very small, it was a place to explore. At that point, it had a dirt floor and a loft, and as a child, crawl around in the loft and look at all the nooks and crannies, see what I could find. In later years is where we actually would put farm machinery for the purpose of rebuilding every winter. So after crops were laid by, we would put one piece of farm machinery in the shop, and that year we would totally rebuild the piece of farm machinery. It was very important as a farm family to keep the equipment in good shape, and money was tight at the time, so you didn't go out and buy new tractors all the time or new equipment. So if you could do something to keep it running, we did that. But the other thing that you'll notice on this barn, there's a basketball hoop on the side, and that was traditional for the area. Many of the people would have a basketball hoop for their kids to play a little basketball. Unfortunately, though, in farm families, we didn't have the even ground to dribble a basketball, so basketball games were a little difficult. But mostly we ended up playing games like horse or pig or something like that, where you would try to shoot a basket, the other person would then come behind and have to make the identical type shot. But I can remember many days coming out in the summer just with a rubber ball or tennis ball and baseball mitt thrown against the barn, and that was a way to have catch. We didn't have a lot of people in the neighborhood, so you had to make do with what you did, and it wasn't always convenient to have one of the friends come over. You'll notice that there's some trees in the area, and they were always great for climbing. Spent a lot of time climbing trees and just exploring the area. We had to cut the grass. We would help with indoor chores, washing, drying dishes. When Mom would clean, we'd bring the rugs out, hang on the clothesline, beat the rugs out to get the dust and dirt out. But Dad, especially with the boys, kept us very busy during the summers. It was either cutting grass, doing work in the yards, or in the fields. I have referred to the weed eater of my times were a fodder knife, a weed whip, and a small sickle. And you would take the sickle to cut weeds that were close by and use the fodder knife for cutting bigger weeds. All farms at the time had multiple buildings because oftentimes they had cattle, they had chickens, You know, they might have shops to work on equipment or store their tools and sheds. And here's just a couple of the farm buildings that are still standing here at the home place. The shop or barn and the shed that was behind us. It was before the days of the pole sheds that we have today. But many of the farms had milking parlors. They had sheds, they had corn cribs. They would have small chicken houses on their properties, meat houses, milk houses, and the Truitt farm, which is right across the field. And oftentimes as a child, I would walk across the dirt road, walk across to the Truitts, and follow Jimmy Truitt and Clara Truitt around on their farm. It was a fun day. Theirs was a stereotypical farm. They had all the buildings, they had all the animals, they had cattle, they had milk cows, they had chickens in the yard, chickens in the chicken houses, the regular poultry that we see. They had ducks and guineas. And guineas are a fowl that actually came from Africa. And you have to be careful in certain areas because they love to eat honeybees. And so farmers that were depending on honeybees for pollination of crops would not have guineas. But a lot of people liked the guineas because they did eat bees. They would eat ticks as well. And they professed to be great for Guinean dumplings because they were a dark meat fowl. But I could go over to Jimmy Truitt's and spend the day following him and his wife around in their garden, around the different animals they had. And for a child too, something was great. They had a collie, aptly named Lassie. Looked just like the Lassie TV show. And it was always great experiences to go over there and spend time with them, and it was quite often. I was honored many years later to give the eulogy for Jimmy Truitt upon his death. And during that eulogy, I commented that when I think of Jimmy Truitt, I think of a way of life, a time when it was an easier going time, a time when people had room to roam and to go visit neighbors and to help neighbors, and knowing that their neighbors cared for them and looked out for them. And it was a great neighborhood to grow up in. I'm in front of the Sycamore store now, and this came from an area between Georgetown and Laurel that was actually a small community known as Sycamore. And as our community had Wilson's store, the Sycamore area had the Sycamore store. And there were small stores throughout the community that would serve the local farm folks. Well, part of the tradition would be after church on Sundays, our family, and a lot of the farm families, would go look at their crops and look at neighbors' crops. And after Sunday school, we would often ride over to Sycamore because Dad had a connection with the Sycamore store. He often recounted that his parents would meet at the Sycamore store at times in their youth. And in fact, his grandfather was a tenant farmer near where the current Epworth Church is and the Sycamore area, behind where the Sycamore store was located at that time. The building was sold. We were able to purchase it and move it here, and Dad was in the process of restoring the store up to the time of his death. His goal was to have this to serve as a mini museum for all the artifacts that he had been able to collect over the years for the church. But I'm glad that we were able to preserve this little bit of Sussex County history. For a child, a big item living in a rural area was a bicycle. And when I say bicycle, I mean the basic two-wheeler with a coaster brake. There were no multi-speed bikes. I remember my older brother Merle one time got what we referred to as an English bike. The English bike had 3 speeds, but the only problem was it didn't work well in the country because most of our roads were dirt roads, and the skinny tires just did not travel well on the dirt roads. So everyone had a balloon tire coaster brake two-wheeler. And that was great because that's how you'd go see your friends. That's how we'd go to the stores. We would usually equip the bikes with a basket on front so we could go up and down the sides of the roads, get soft drink bottles to take to Wilson store to get them redeemed for a few cents so we could redeem for some penny candy ourselves. One activity at nights when Mom no longer did her grocery shopping at the Clover Farm store, but Acme Markets came to Georgetown. They gave S&H green stamps. So many nights we would sit as a family around the dining room table and filling up books with S&H green stamps. You would get a redemption catalog, and as a kid it was kind of a wish book, almost like the Sears Roebuck and Ward's books that came in September for Christmas. And you would find things that you could redeem with the S&H green stamps. And I remember when I went into Cub Scouts, then later into Boy Scouts, that I got my pack and my sleeping bag and things like that from the S&H green stamps. At the time, the only redemption store was in Dover, Delaware, but later there was one built right next to the Acme Market. The picture on the screen now is actually taken at our farm. Probably in the early 60s. These chickens, and many people refer to them now as chicks, but on the Delmarva Peninsula we referred to them as biddies. Were only a couple days old. In the foreground you'll see a crock, and that held the water that the chickens or the biddies drank from, and traditionally we would use those for about a week to 10 days, and then they would graduate and go to the actual waterers. The little boxes that they are in are cardboard boxes, and they're the actual box lids from the boxes that the biddies were brought to the chicken houses in. And what is hanging in the center is an actual gas brooder stove. And when the chicks were very young, or the biddies, we would keep the temperature to about 90 degrees in the chicken house. And then as they got older, they would be lifted and then turned off. The tractor on the screen is a WD-45 Allis-Chalmers, and this was the tractor that I used often, although I learned to drive on a Farmall tractor, which was easy to learn on for a child. The WD-45 had a lot of power, and I used it because we needed to do a lot of plowing, and it pulled a 3-moldboard plow. Why I was assigned this tractor is due to the fact my legs were too short to hit the clutch, but it had a hand clutch as well. So even though I couldn't reach the clutch to change gears, I could throw the hand clutch, change gears, and to stop it. To learn more about the book or the topic that we've discussed today, be sure to visit us on Facebook or on our website through the links that are on the screen or in the description.